Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Theology is faith-seeking understanding, and that really is still a viable definition. It means that a person of faith, a person with deep convictions about life, is seeking an understanding of it, trying to make sense out of that.
Joining Father Bacik in today's reflections are Father Richard Feigenbaum, college counselor and advisor at St. Francis de Sales High School in Toledo, Ohio, and executive producer Mary Beth Kirchner.
Very often, theology is seen as this hard scientific discipline, I suppose, by some people that has its own jargon, and that's true in a sense. Theologians can get carried away with their own language like everybody else.
Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of theology. Here's Father Bacik.
You know, theology really is an interesting topic to me. I love theology. A lot of people think theology is really just a speculative kind of discipline divorced from the real cares of people, but I really don't see it that way. I've come to see theology as being extremely relevant for our lives. Theology raises the great human questions. It's an entree into discussing what the things that are really important to us. It's a way of trying to look at our deepest kind of values, trying to figure out who we are and where we fit into the larger scheme of things. It's an attempt to try to make sense out of our experience, to sort it out and put some order into it. And so it seems to me that that's exciting just in itself. I love to talk about theology. It seems important to me. You know, theology, the classical definition of it given to us by Anselm was that theology is faith-seeking understanding. And that really is still a viable definition. It means that a person of faith, a person with deep convictions about life, is seeking an understanding of it, trying to make sense out of that. Very often, theology is seen as this hard scientific discipline, I suppose, by some people that has its own jargon, and that's true in a sense. Theologians can get carried away with their own language like everybody else, like any other particular field, and that is disturbing. And I suppose one of the jobs of the theologian is to avoid that and keep trying to find language that makes sense to people, find categories that are really helpful instead of soaring off someplace in the ivory tower. So the theologians are in danger of that, of cutting themselves off from real life, of retreating into academe and discussing just among themselves. But I see that as a perversion of what theology is all about. Theology really has to do with enabling people to understand the faith that is within them. So that this is part of the reason that I guess it excites me, because it deals with real life. Very often, many of the other disciplines don't open up those great human questions. Science is important, and it deals with causal factors and so on, but it doesn't necessarily open up into the larger questions of why are we doing this science, or how can it benefit mankind, or what are the moral imperatives that guide this scientific research. But in philosophy itself in our own time has often gotten bogged down in an analysis of language, common human language. We have the linguistic tradition. And so philosophy can end up being nothing more than logic, or the sorting out of words and language, or clearing the space in life. And again, where do the great human questions get asked? I say that theology is always open to them. The world of the theologian says, bring in the great questions. Let's hear your real concerns. Let's talk about it in depth. Nothing really is ruled out for us about the human situation and really what that is all about. So theology to me is an exciting discipline. It always wasn't that. I studied it for a while where it seemed rather dull and dry, but today, to me, it really is where the action is.
Father Bacik, are there certain theologians that have had a great impact on you as far as really sparking your interest in theology?
Well, yes, I guess there have been, Mary Beth. You turned me to more personal thoughts. I guess the prime one, that is the great German Jesuit theologian by the name of Karl Rahner. I guess people who know me well have heard that word so much they don't want to hear it anymore. But Rahner is extremely influential on my thought. I think he is still alive, living in Munich in retirement now. He's written a vast number of books. He's the only man I ever saw whose bookshelves in his room are all lined with his own books. Written and translated into so many different languages. They keep a listing of the books and articles he's written, second editions and translations, and up to 1974 the list was over 3,000. So Rahner's written a lot, but he has been a major influence on me. To hear Rahner's thought gives me a way of understanding my Christian faith and being able to accept it in an intellectually honest way. I had the privilege of spending some time with Karl Rahner in Munich, and when I left him a note. And I said in the note, Father Rahner, I want to thank you for enabling me to remain a Christian. In other words, what Rahner did for me is give me an understanding of Christianity, a reinterpretation of the classic Christian doctrines that make sense to me, that I find that I'm easy with. They fit with my general outlook on life. I feel integrated when I talk about them. I find I can use them in my preaching and my teaching. They come, his phrases, his categories, his approach come easily to my lips. I don't feel as though I have to set my intelligence aside as I talk about Christianity, because he's given me an intellectually honest way of looking at it.
Jim, what was it that he said that made you so comfortable with your Christianity?
Well, I suppose it really is his whole system, but put in a nutshell, it is that he understands human nature in a healthy way. He understands us as human beings, as people who are necessarily related to God. He loves to begin with us. For him, the first religious question in many ways is, who am I, or who are we? You begin with human experience, something that's vital to us. I mean, it's hard to take that question and be unconcerned about it. Who am I? Everyone's interested in that. So you start out with a fundamental base of human experience. And for Rahner, it's not a question of bringing God into the picture someplace, or artificially introducing him into your life. For Rahner, God is always there. We as human beings are essentially related to this mystery that we call God our Father. So, Rich, that is his fundamental insight, and all of those many volumes and articles really flow out of that central point. Now, what he has done for me, of course, is to reinterpret all of those many doctrines in Christianity, and to do it in an organic way in the light of that essential point that I was just making. I envision that as sort of a great searchlight, that fundamental notion that who are we? We are human beings who are essentially related to the great mystery that we call God. I call that his searchlight. And he's used that to illumine all of the problems of life, no matter what it is. If it's talking with Marxists, or dealing with scientists, or trying to understand our laughter as human beings, all the common ordinary things, he's used that one essential idea to illumine it and help us to see it in a deeper way in the light of faith. So Rahner is the great influence on me, although I once wrote that the important thing about studying Rahner is that one should never become a disciple of his. He doesn't really form a school of thought. What Rahner does is encourage you to go out and think creatively for yourself. One of the first times I met him and told him I intended to write a book about him, he said to me, make sure you're critical. Make sure you look for the negative side in it, and that you criticize my thought. So interestingly enough, Rahner has not really formed disciples around himself or a school of thought, but he's encouraged a lot of people to think for themselves.
Are there any American theologians that you've found interest in?
Well, Rich, I guess I have been privileged to study under some of the great theologians around. In the late 60s, I was in New York and spent a couple years studying there, and encountered some important thinkers there, like Father Raymond Brown, the great Catholic New Testament scholar, who a lot of people know about, I guess. I worked as an assistant for Brother Gabriel Moran at Manhattan College, too, while I was in New York. And Moran had a great influence on my thinking. Listened to Robert Johann, a man who works out of the American Pragmatic tradition, affected me a lot. Not only American thinkers at that time, I was privileged then to study under a number of the world's great theologians. Hans Kung, who is very much known and in the news, was teaching at Union Theological, and I had a course on ecumenical approach to the sacraments from him. Father Bernard Herring, who I guess would be known as the finest Catholic moral theologian in the world, he also taught at Union, and I had the chance to study under him. I've been closely aligned with the Anglican theologian, Dr. John Macquarie, who directed my own doctoral dissertation, and Macquarie, again, a very balanced kind of thinker. He was influential. I guess the important thing in all those people is what you get out of them. I noticed throughout life that it always has seemed good to me to take people at their best, to look for what they have positively to offer, rather than beginning with a critique or making a judgment too quickly about their work. I guess I've taken that as a general approach to say, well, what do people have to offer? What could I get out of listening to them? And I believe that that's how I approached those thinkers that I was privileged to study under. So from Bernard Herring, you get a tremendous sense of the importance of a generous Christian love, that legalism really isn't the proper approach to Christianity. From Gabriel Moran, I got a sense of being patient with oneself and seeing the ambiguity of life, seeing that really as we look at ourselves, we're often a mixture of two opposite poles, so that I want to be independent in many ways, but other ways I find myself being very dependent upon people, dependent upon family, loved ones, and so on. So Moran was very good at pointing out how we'll always look at our lives and see these two things in tension, independence and dependence, being active and being passive. See, all of those things. So I think from Moran I got a sense of that. Well, I suppose I could go on. Macquarie, that notion of balance, keeping various things in balance. Macquarie once said he was in the Toledo area and talked in the not too distant past, and made that one of his themes, and was telling me privately afterwards that as he gets older in life, he sees that the great danger is to collapse one or the other poles of a dialectic. That is, to make one side of an argument too big or too important and keep emphasizing, and just to lose all the rest of the value of the other side. He sort of sees the whole history of Christian thought that way, that people end up getting so gung-ho about one side of the doctrine or the faith and losing the opposite or the counterpoint to it.
Father Bacik, I know your role as a theologian has certainly depended on all these studies, yet as I have known you in your work at Bowling Green State University, your role as a theologian has taken on a totally different light in your work with students. How does all this work with all in the world of academia somehow relate when it comes to dealing with college-level people on a day-to-day basis?
Mary Beth, I have often said that I've learned more from my counseling practice than in reading all of the theology books, and I think that that's a fairly accurate statement. I think that I end up doing quite a bit of counseling, I guess, and I find that if I'm able to listen well, try to empathize with people, that I learn a great deal about the common human condition that way. I guess I've said that whenever we listen well to other human beings, we find somehow it echoes within ourselves. We find the same problems, the same difficulties, maybe more intense, maybe less intense, but we learn the commonness of human nature that way. We really do walk the same path. And so that certainly has been an important part of my life. I used to teach full-time in a seminary at one time, and I said at that time that I thought I could remain doing that only for a couple years and remain sane. I often felt that, for me at least, a total immersion in the world of academe, of just doing research or theological work would be very diminishing to me. It would be truncating my life in many ways. So I have felt the need for this involvement with other people, and especially the pastoral kind of concerns. I suppose another thing in my work is the celebration of the liturgy, the having the Mass, and what a really good thing that is. I think maybe Rich could talk about this too, or see it the same way, but very often I find that the function of celebrating the Mass is personally rewarding. That is, for example, you have to look at the Scriptures ahead of time, and you have to try to figure out what they might mean to you. It forces a certain amount of personal reflection. And very often the liturgy has a power, at least for me, to lift me out of myself. I mean, one of the problems of priests is that they have to say a lot of Masses. And saying a lot of Masses, it's hard to get up for them. You know what I mean? It's hard to try to get oneself gathered and get excited and to communicate that excitement and importance to the people when you're saying a lot of Masses. So there's times when you go over to church and you really don't want to say Mass. I mean, and what I have found very often in my congregation in St. Thomas More University Parish in Bowling Green is that the Mass will start and I will be in that sort of turned in on myself mood, and what will happen is the opening song comes on, and very often our music is great, and it starts to lift me out of myself, and I walk down the aisle, and there's people there actually expecting something to happen. You know, they're coming there expecting to get something out of this Mass. And it suddenly dawns on me that, you know, that's my job. I have to work at this. And it seems very often to have a power to lift me out of myself. One of my senses is that people really do think at various times about religious matters. They often don't connect it up with religion or the question of God explicitly. But there's probably more deeper kind of reflection that goes on than one might first imagine. I think that's another thing that happens in the priesthood, is that we often encounter people at the moments when they are thinking seriously. You could walk down the street or go to an ordinary party and the conversation is very superficial very often, and people are just chatting here and there. And very often I notice when I end up at those parties, invariably someone will want to go take me to the side and say, hey, you know, I've been wrestling with this question, or what do you think about this matter? I'm trying to figure out how to work on my marriage here. Or I've been wondering lately, I've been very depressed in exactly what this is all about. So that in other words, because of my job as a priest, I think that I encounter more serious talk like that, or at least I have a sense that people are into that more than other people might think. I mean, you might look at this individual and say, geez, they're always happy-go-lucky, and every party I'm at, they're just up and all that, and I might know very differently. I might know another side of them, because when they're down or depressed, they want to talk to me, or when they're wrestling with their value questions and so on, they turn to me. So in one sense, that is a great plus in being a priest. You're involved in this world of seriousness, I guess.
You know, to ask the question, from my point of view, like I'm wondering, Mary Beth, why do you turn to the theologian in your life, whether it be a Protestant minister, a Jewish rabbi, or a Catholic priest?
You know, Rich, I was just thinking about that same point, in that I had taken a course from Father Bacik called Contemporary Theology, and my reason for turning to Father Bacik for that type of instruction was an attempt to redefine my Catholic faith as an adult, to try and move away from the classic theology that I had grown up with and try to adapt all of that instruction to somehow fit all the changes in my life. Father Bacik, is that your reason for teaching that type of course at Bowling Green, finding that a lot of students have similar needs to what I have?
Yeah, I think I'll have you come, Mary Beth, and give the introductory lecture, as a matter of fact. I think that would work out real well. Yeah, that is certainly one of the reasons that I see for teaching that kind of class, or the work of the theologian. That is to help people achieve a more adult understanding of the faith. Let's face it, as you grow up, you have to think in childish ways. When you most people first encounter their religious tradition, it is in the terms of the child. And as you grow along in life, things change. As you said, your life changed, your personality has changed, your character, and now where does your religion fit in? At that time, as people are going along, very often it seems to them that they have to have a split here, that one or the other's got to go. If they're going to be true to themselves, to their own growth and development as a person, then the religion has got to go. It's a drag, it's something for children. It's not intellectually defensible. It doesn't fit anymore. I meet a lot of young people who are just uncomfortable with it. It just doesn't jive anymore. Exactly. And very often, I think a previous generation was fairly at ease with that. They did what I call oscillating. They would act and think one way on Sunday and in connection with church or when talking to the rabbi or the minister or the priest, and then during the week in their business or recreational activity in their family life, they thought and acted in a very different way. And that seemed all right. Well, I meet a lot of young people who talk as you do. That is, they say, I don't want to oscillate. I don't want to feel split. I'm looking for an integration in my life where my religion is part of who I am, where it is the glue that holds me together or that which gives me a higher purpose in life. So, yeah, I think that's a good example. You used something else, too, about, I forget what your phrase was, something about, in my mind, it clicked in as rerouting yourself in your own Catholic background.
Right.
I often use the word to reappropriate. In other words, to mine the riches of that tradition. I know over the years as I've taught at the university and encountered students of various traditions, I have often encouraged them to go back to it and to try to recover it. I think of one Jewish lad I taught and who had given up on Judaism and so on. I encouraged him to write his paper on a Jewish thinker. And in doing so, I think he really got back in touch with his religious roots and found himself to be feeling much more integrated with that. And later on, I mean, that his Jewish faith became an important part of his life. So it seems to me that part of the job of the religious teacher is to help people to reappropriate that tradition. And when you're doing that, then it's, I think, a valuable function to perform for people. Of course, given all this positive side of it, I mean, as a theologian, I mean, there's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of negative things happen. I mean, you have to recognize a lot of times you're trying to find a way to say it to people, and you can't find the right language. Can't explain it to them the way you would like to. Finding the categories that fit or the experiences that are common. Very often, I find myself drifting off and talking in too abstract a way, and talking using words that people really don't understand. My father always insisted on that. You know, speak in simple language, he said. You know, keep the sermons short. And use, whenever you got a choice, use simple words rather than difficult ones. Well, I forget that very often, and it's good to be brought back to that, really.
Jim, what's your day like?
I end up dividing my duties, I guess, between, my academic life and my pastoral life. A lot of my academic life is it means that I usually teach maybe one course each quarter on a religious topic for Bowling Green State University, and then I'll be teaching a couple of other things at the Newman Center at St. Thomas More University Parish as a non-credit type courses. I do a certain amount of work in trying to prepare those classes. I try to do some writing regularly. I write that bi-weekly theological column that's known as Reflections, and I'm periodically working on a book or trying to put one together. So that is the whole academic side, and then there is the other pastoral side where I will celebrate the liturgy and hear confessions and visit people in the hospital. We have a regular university parish, meaning we have marriages there and baptisms and people who are ill in the hospital. And I guess I do a lot of counseling, as I was saying to Mary Beth before. I feel that that's one of the really valuable things that I do for myself. Of course, we're there as a service to others, and I think that's valuable work in that way, but I find it rewarding, mostly because it forces me very often to look at my own life and to see how I'm handling the kind of problems. And I think it increases one's empathy. You know, whenever you can listen well, it helps you to really end up relating to people better. There's theologians who are really good at it, you know, the people who make a contribution in life and really do something worthwhile. There's other people who are sort of on the fringes of that, and you move down the scale. I've always thought of most of my work as sort of popularizing the work of the great theologians, of taking the important ideas that I've been privileged to learn about in my life, and having exposure to these important thinkers. And a lot of my work is trying to get their ideas across to other people, trying to simplify it or to use it in my classes or in my counseling. So, you know, that word theologian shouldn't be thrown around too easily and so on. I dabble in it. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. But I think the point is that I have found it to be an integrating thing. It's a blessing in life when you can find your interests in life are coordinated with your functions, with your jobs. And so I find that theology is helpful to me in so many areas, in my preaching, my teaching, and my counseling work. And for me, it does come together at this time. You never know when things might break up. I don't want to get carried away or sound too optimistic, but for the present at least, yeah, the theological world and whole role of theology is an integrating factor for me.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion were Father Richard Feigenbaum, college counselor and advisor at St. Francis de Sales High School in Toledo, and executive producer Mary Beth Kirchner. The topic of this week's Reflections was Understanding Theology. If you have any comments about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio, 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mark Ferguson. Executive producer is Mary Beth Kirchner.